Part 1, Chapter 26 of the Daisy Chain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona. The Daisy Chain by Charlotte Mary Yonge. What matter, whether through delight, or led through vale of tears, or seen at once, or hid from sight, the glorious way appears? If step by step the path we see, that leads, my Saviour, up to Thee. I could not help it, said Dr. May. That little witch. Meta Rivers? Oh, what, Papa? It seems that Wednesday is her birthday, and nothing will serve her but to eat her dinner in the old Roman camp. And are we to go? Oh, which of us? Everyone of anything like rational ears. Blanche is especially invited. There were transports till it was recollected that on Thursday morning school would recommence, and that on Friday Harry must join his ship. However, the Roman camp had long been an object of their desires, and Margaret was glad that the last day should have a brilliancy, so she would not hear of anyone remaining to keep her company, talked of the profit she should gain by a leisure day, and took ardent interest in everyone's preparations and expectations, in Ethel's researches into county histories and classical dictionaries, Flora's sketching intentions, Norman's promises of Campanula Glamourata, and a secret whispered into her ear by Mary and Harry. Maida's weather, as they said, when the August sun rose fresh and joyous, and great was the unnecessary bustle and happy confusion from 6 o'clock till 11, when Dr. May, who was going to visit patients some way further on the same road, carried off Harry and Mary to set them down at the place. The rest were called for by Mr. Rivers's carriage and brake. Mrs. Charles Wilmot and her little girl were the only additions to the party, and Maida, putting Blanche into the carriage to keep company with her contemporary, went herself in the brake. What a brilliant little fairy she was, in her pink summer robes, fluttering like a butterfly, and with the same apparent felicity in basking in joy, all gaiety, glee, and light-heartedness in making others happy. On they went through honeysuckled lanes, catching glimpses of sunny fields of corn falling before the reaper, and happy knots of harvest folks dining beneath the shelter of their sheaves, with the sturdy old green umbrella sheltering them from the sun. Snatches of song, peals of laughter, merry nonsense passed from one to the other. Norman, roused into blitheness, found wit, the young ladies found laughter, and Richard's eyes and mouth looked very pretty as they smiled their quiet diversion. At last, his face drawn all into one silent laugh, he directed the eyes of the rest to a high green mound, rising immediately before them, where stood two little figures, one with a spyglass, intently gazing the opposite way. At the same time came the halt, and Norman, bounding out, sprang lightly and nimbly up the side of the mound, and, while the spyglass was yet pointed full at Wales, had hold of a pair of stout legs, and with the words, "Keep a good lookout," had tumbled Mr. May head foremost down the grassy slope, with Mary rolling after. Harry's first outcry was for his precious glass. His second was, not at his fall, but that they should have come from the east, when, by the compass, Stoneborough was north-northwest. And then the boys took to tumbling over one another, while Maida frolicked joyously, with Nippon after her, up and down the mounds, chased by Mary and Blanche, who were wild with glee. By and by she joined Ethel, and Norman was summoned to help them to trace out the old lines of encampment, ditch, rampart, and gates. Happy work on those slopes of fresh turf, embroidered with every minute blossom of the moor, thyme, birdsfoot, eyebright, and dwarf purple thistle, buzzed and hummed over by busy, black-tailed, yellow-banded Dumbledores, the breezy wind blowing softly in their faces, and the expanse of country, wooded hill, verdant pasture, amber harvest field, winding river, smoke-canopied town, and brown moor, melting grayly away to the mountain heads. Now in sun, now in shade, the bright young antiquary surveyed the old banks, and talked wisely of vallum and fossa, of legion and cohort, of Agricola and Suetonius, and discussed the delightful probability that this might have been raised in the war with Caractacus, whence, argued Ethel, since Caractacus was certainly Arviragus, it must have been the very spot where Imogen met Posthumus again. Was not yonder the very high road to Milford Haven, and thus must not Fairfidel's grassy tomb be in the immediate neighbourhood? Then followed the suggestion that the mound in the middle was a good deal like an ancient tomb, where, as Blanche interposed with some of the lore lately caught from Ethel's studies, they used to bury their tears in wheelbarrows, while Norman observed it was the more probable, as Fairfidel never was buried at all. The idea of a search enchanted the young ladies. It was the right sort of vehicle, evidently, said Norman, looking at Harry, who had been particularly earnest in recommending that it should be explored, and made it declare that if they could but find the least trace, her papa would be delighted to go regularly to work and reveal all the treasures. Richard seemed a little afraid of the responsibility of treasure trove, but he was overruled by a chorus of eager voices and dispossessed of the trowel which he had brought to dig up some down gentians for the garden. While Norman set to work as pioneer, some skipped about in wild ecstasy, and Ethel knelt down to peer into the hole. Very soon there was a discovery, an eager outcry, some pottery, Roman vessels, a red thing that might have been a lamp, another that might have been a lacrimatory. "Well," said Ethel, "you know, Norman, I always told you that the children's pots and pans in the clay ditch were very like Roman pottery." "Posthumus's patty pan," said Norman, holding it up. "No doubt this was the bottle filled with the old queen's tears when Cloten was killed." "You see it is very small," added Harry. "She could not squeeze out many." "Come now, I do believe you are laughing at it," said Maida, taking the derided vessels into her hands. "Now, they really are genuine and very curious things, are not they, Flora?" Flora and Ethel admired and speculated till there was a fresh and still more exciting discovery, a coin, actually a medal, with the head of an emperor upon it, not a doubt of his high nose being Roman. Maida was certain that she knew one exactly like him among her father's gems. Ethel was resolved that he should be Claudius, and began deciphering the defaced inscription THVRVS. She tried Claudius's whole torrent of names, and, at last, made it into a contraction of Tiberius, which highly satisfied her. Then Maida, in her turn, read DVX, which, as Ethel said, was all she could wish. Of course it was Dux a Imperator, and Harry muttered into Norman's ear, "Ducks and geese," and then heaved a sigh, as he thought of the ducks no longer. "VV," continued Maida. "What can that mean?" "Five, of course," said Flora. No, I have it. Venus Victrix," said Ethel. "The ancestral Venus. Ha! Don't you see? There she is on the other side, crowning Claudius." "Then there is an E." "Something about Aeneas," suggested Norman gravely, but Ethel was sure that could not be, because there was no diphthong, and a fresh theory was just being started when Blanche's head was thrust in to know what made them all so busy. "Why, Ethel, what are you doing with Harry's old medal of the Duke of Wellington?" Poor Maida and Ethel, what a downfall! Maida was sure that Norman had known it the whole time, and he owned to having guessed it from Harry's importunity for the search. Harry and Mary had certainly made good use of their time, and great was the mirth over the trap so cleverly set. The more when it was disclosed that Dr. May had been a full participator in the scheme, had suggested the addition of the pottery, had helped Harry to some liquid to efface part of the inscription, and had even come up with them to plant the snare in the most plausible corner for researches. Maida, enchanted with the joke, flew off to try to take in her governess and Mrs. Wilmot, whom she found completing their leisurely promenade, and considering where they should spread the dinner. The sight of those great baskets of good fare was appetizing, and the company soon collected on the shady turf, where Richard made himself extremely useful, and the feast was spread without any worse mishap than Nippin's running away with half a chicken, of which he was robbed, as Tom reported, by a surly-looking dog that watched in the outskirts of the camp, and caused Tom to return nearly as fast as the poor little white marauder. Maida, very immorally, as Norman told her, comforted Nippon with a large share of her sandwiches. Harry armed himself with his stick and Mary with a stone, and marched off to the attack, but saw no signs of the enemy, and had begun to believe him a figment of Tom's imagination, when Mary spied him under a bush, lying at the feet of a boy with whom he was sharing the spoil. Harry called out rather roughly, "Hello! What are you doing there?" The boy jumped up, the dog growled. Mary shrank behind her brother, and begged him not to be cross to the poor boy, but to come away. Harry repeated his question. "Please, sir, Toby brought it to me." "What, is Toby your dog?" "Yes, sir." "Are you so hungry as to eat dog's meat?" "I have not had nothing before to-day, sir." "Why, where do you live? Hereabouts?" "Oh, no, sir. I lived with grandmother up in Cheshire, but she is dead now, and father has just come home from sea, and he wrote down I was to be sent to him at Portsmouth to go to sea with him." "How do you live? Do you beg your way?" "No, sir. Father sent up £1 in a letter, only Nanny Brooks said I owed some to her for her victuals, and I have not much of it left, and bread comes dear, so when Toby brought me this bit of meat I was glad of it, sir, but I would not have taken it." The boy was desired to wait while the brother and sister, in breathless excitement, rushed back with their story. Mrs. Wilmot was at first inclined to fear that the naval part of it had been inspired by Harry's uniform, but the examination of Jim Jennings put it beyond a doubt that he spoke nothing but the truth, and the choicest delight of the feast was the establishing him and Toby behind the barrow and feeding him with such viands as they had probably never seen before. The boy could not read writing, but he had his father's letter in his pocket, and Mary capered at the delightful coincidence on finding that Jim Jennings was actually a quartermaster on board the Alcestis. It gave a sort of property in the boy, and she almost grudged Maida the having been first to say that she would pay for the rest of his journey instead of doing it by subscription. However, Mary had a consolation. She would offer to take charge of Toby, who, as Harry observed, would otherwise have been drowned. He could not be taken on board. To be sure, he was a particularly ugly animal, rough, grizzly, short-legged, long-backed, and with an apology for a tail, but he had a redeeming pair of eyes, and he and Jim lived on terms of such close friendship that he would have been miserable in leaving him to the mercy of Nanny Brooks. So, after their meal, Jim and Toby were bidden to wait for Dr. May's coming, and fell asleep together on the green bank, while the rest either sketched or wondered or botanized. Flora acted the grown-up lady with Mrs. Wilmot, and Maida found herself sitting by Ethel, asking her a great many questions about Margaret and her home, and what it could be like to be one of such a numerous family. Flora had always turned aside from personal matters as uninteresting to her companion, and, in spite of Maida's admiration and the mutual wish to be intimate, confidence did not spring up spontaneously, as it had done with the doctor and, in that single hour, with Margaret. Blunt as Ethel was, her heartiness of manner gave a sense of real progress in friendship. Their confirmation vows seemed to make a link, and Maida's unfeigned enthusiasm for the doctor was the sure road to Ethel's heart. She was soon telling how glad Margaret was that he had been drawn into taking pleasure in today's scheme, since, not only were his spirits tried by the approach of Harry's departure, but he had, within the last few days, been made very sad by reading and answering Aunt Flora's first letter on the news of last October's misfortune. "My aunt in New Zealand!" exclaimed Ethel. "Have you an aunt in New Zealand?" cried Maida. "I never heard of her." "Did not you? Oh, she does write such charming long letters. Is she Dr. May's sister?" "No, he was an only child. She is dear mamma's sister. I don't remember her, for she went out when I was a baby, but Richard and Margaret were so fond of her. They say she used to play with them, and tell them stories, and sing Scotch songs to them. Margaret says the first sorrow of her life was Aunt Flora's going away." Did she live with them? Yes, after Grandpapa died, she came to live with them, but then Mr. Arnott came about. I ought not to speak evil of him, for he is my godfather, but we do wish he had not carried off Aunt Flora. That letter of hers showed me what a comfort it would be to Papa to have her here. Perhaps she will come. No, Uncle Arnott has too much to do. It was a pretty story altogether. He was an officer at Edinburgh and fell in love with Aunt Flora, but my grandfather Mackenzie thought him too poor to marry her, and it was all broken off, and they tried to think no more of it. But Grandpapa died, and she came to live here, and somehow Mr. Arnott turned up again, quartered at Whitford, and Papa talked over my Uncle Mackenzie and helped them, and Mr. Arnott thought the best way would be to go out to the colonies. They went when New Zealand was very new, and a very funny life they had. Once they had their house burned in Hecky's rebellion, and Aunt Flora saw a Maori walking about in her best Sunday bonnet. But in general, everything has gone on very well, and he has a great farm besides an office under government. Oh, so he went out as a settler. I was in hopes it was as a missionary. I fancy Aunt Flora has done a good deal that may be called missionary work, said Ethel, teaching the Maori women and girls. They call her mother, and she has quite a doctor's shop for them, and tries hard to teach them to take proper care of their poor little children when they are ill. And she cuts out clothes for the whole pa, that is the village. And are they Christians? Oh, to be sure they are now. They meet in the pa for prayers every morning and evening. They used to have a hoe struck against a bit of metal for a signal, and when Papa heard of it, he gave them a bell, and they were so delighted. Now there comes a clergyman every fourth Sunday, and, on the others, Uncle Arnott reads part of the service to the English dear, and the Maori teacher to his people. Maida asked ravenously for more details, and when she had pretty well exhausted Ethel's stock, she said, "How nice it must be! Ethel, did you ever read the Faithful Little Girl?" Yes, it was one of Margaret's old Sunday books. I often recollected it before I was allowed to begin Coxmore. I'm afraid I am very like Lucilla, said Maida. What, in wishing to be a boy, that you might be a missionary? Said Ethel. Not in being quite so cross at home? She added, laughing. I am not cross because I have no opportunity, said Maida. No opportunity. Oh, Maida, if people wish to be cross, it is easy enough to find grounds for it. There is always the moon to cry for. Really and truly, said Maida thoughtfully, I never do meet with any reasonable trial of temper, and I am often afraid it cannot be right or safe to live so entirely at ease and without contradictions. Well, but, said Ethel, it is the state of life in which you are placed. Yes, but are we meant never to have vexations? I thought you had them, said Ethel. Margaret told me about your maid. That would have worried some people and made them horribly cross. Oh, no rational person, cried Maida. It was so nice to think of her being with a poor mother, and I was quite interested in managing for myself. Besides, you know, it was just a proof how one learns to be selfish, that it had never occurred to me that I ought to spare her. And your school children? You were in some trouble about them? Oh, that is pleasure. I thought you had a class you did not like. I like them now. They are such steady, plodding girls, so much in earnest, and one, that has been neglected, is so pleased and touched by kindness. I would not give them up for anything now. They are just fit for my capacity. Do you mean that nothing ever goes wrong with you, or that you do not mind anything? Which? Nothing goes wrong enough with me to give me a handsome excuse for minding it. Then it must be all your good temper. I don't think so, said Maida. It is that nothing is ever disagreeable to me. Stay, said Ethel. If the ill temper was in you, you would only be the crosser for being indulged. At least, so books say. And I'm sure myself that it is not whether things are disagreeable or not, but whether one's will is with them, that signifies. I don't quite understand. Why, I have seen the boys do for play, and done myself, what would have been a horrid hardship if one had been made to do it. I never liked any lessons as well as those I did without being obliged, And always, when there is a thing I hate very much in itself, I can get up an interest in it by resolving that I will do it well, or fast, or something. If I can stick my will to it, it is like a lever, and it is done. Now, I think it must be the same with you, only your will is more easily set at it than mine. What makes me uncomfortable is that I feel as if I never followed anything but my will." Ethel screwed up her face, as if the eyes of her mind were pursuing some thought almost beyond her. "If our will and our duty run the same," she said, "that can't be wrong. The better people are, the more they love what he commands, you know. In heaven they have no will but his." "Oh, but Ethel," cried Maida, distressed, "that is putting it too high. Won't you understand what I mean? We have learned so much lately about self-denial and crossing one's own inclinations and enduring hardness. And here I live with two dear kind people who only try to keep every little annoyance from my path. I can't wish for a thing without getting it. I am waited on all day long, and I feel like one of the women that are at ease, one of the careless daughters." "I think still Papa would say it was your happy, contented temper that made you find no vexation." "But that sort of temper is not goodness. I was born with it. I never did mind anything, not even being punished, they say, unless I knew Papa was grieved, which always did make me unhappy enough. I laughed and went to play most saucily, whatever they did to me. If I had striven for the temper, it would be worth having, but it is my nature. And Ethel," she added, in a low voice, as the tears came into her eyes, "don't you remember last Sunday? I felt myself so vain and petted a thing, as if I had no share in the cup of suffering, and did not deserve to call myself a member. It seemed ungrateful." Ethel felt ashamed, as she heard of warmer feelings than her own had been expressed in that lowered, trembling voice, and she sought for the answer that would only come to her mind in sense, not at first in words. "Discipline," said she. "Would not that show the willingness to have the part? Taking the right times for refusing oneself some pleasant thing." "Would not that be only making up something for oneself?" said Maida. "No, the church orders it. It is in the prayer book," said Ethel. "I mean one can do little secret things, not read story books on those days, or keep some tiresome sort of work for them. It is very trumpery, but it keeps the remembrance, and it is not so much as if one did not heed." "I'll think," said Maida, sighing. "If only I felt myself at work, not to please myself, but to be of use. Ha!" she cried, springing up. "I do believe I see Dr. May coming." "Let us run and meet him," said Ethel. They did so, and he called out his wishes of many happy returns of blithe days to the little birthday queen, then added, "You both look grave, though. Have they deserted you?" "No, Papa. We have been having a talk," said Ethel. "May I tell him, Maida? I want to know what he says." Maida had not bargained for this, but she was very much in earnest, and there was nothing formidable in Dr. May, so she assented. "Maida is longing to be at work. She thinks she is of no use," said Ethel. "She says she never does anything but please herself." "Pleasing oneself is not the same as trying to please oneself," said Dr. May kindly. "And she thinks it cannot be safe or right," added Ethel, "to live that happy bright life, as if people without care or trouble could not be living as Christians are meant to live. Is that it, Maida?" "Yes, I think it is," said Maida. "I seem to be only put here to be made much of." "What did David say, Maida?" returned Dr. May. "My shepherd is the living Lord, nothing therefore I need. In pastures fair, near pleasant streams, he setteth me to feed." "Then you think," said Maida, much touched, "that I ought to look on this as the pastures fair and be thankful. I hope I was not unthankful." "Oh, no," said Ethel. "It was the wish to bear hardness and be a good soldier, was it not?" "Ah, my dear," he said, "the rugged path and dark valley will come in His own fit time. Depend upon it, the Good Shepherd is giving you what is best for you in the green meadow, and if you lay hold on His rod and staff in your sunny days, He stopped short and turned to his daughter. Ethel, they sang that psalm the first Sunday I brought your mamma home. Meta was much affected and began to put together what the father and daughter had said. Perhaps the little modes of secret discipline, of which Ethel had spoken, might be the true means of clasping the staff. Perhaps she had been impatient, and wanting in humility and craving for the strife, when her armor was scarce put on. Dr. May spoke once again. Don't let anyone long for external trial. The offering of a free heart is the thing. To offer praise is the great object of all creatures in heaven and earth. If the happier we are, the more we praise, then all is well. But the serious discussion was suddenly broken off. Others had seen Dr. May's approach, and Harry and Mary rushed down in dismay at their story having, as they thought, been forestalled. However, they had it all to themselves, and the doctor took up the subject as keenly as could have been hoped. But the poor boy being still fast asleep, after, probably, much fatigue, he would not then waken him to examine him, but came and sat down in the semicircle, formed by a terraced bank of soft turf, where Mrs. Larpent, Mrs. Wilmot, Richard, and Flora had for some time taken up their abode. Maida brought him the choice little basket of fruit which she had saved for him, and all delighted in having him there, evidently enjoying the rest and sport very much, as he reposed on the fragrant slope, eating grapes, and making inquiries as to the antiquities lately discovered. Norman gave an exceedingly droll account of the great Roman Emperor Tiberius V.V., and Maida correcting it. There was a regular gay skirmish of words, which entertained everyone extremely. Above all, Maida's indignation when the charge was brought home to her of having declared the old Duke exactly like in terms to Domitian and Tiberius, his features quite forbidding. This lasted till the younger ones, who had been playing and rioting till they were tired, came up, and throwing themselves down on the grass, Blanche petitioned for something that everyone could play at. Maida proposed what she called the story play. One was to be sent out of earshot, and the rest to agree upon a word, which was then to be guessed by each telling a story, and introducing the word into it, not too prominently. Maida volunteered to guess, and Harry whispered to Mary it would be no go. But, in the meantime, the word was found, and Blanche eagerly recalled Maida, and sat in the utmost expectation and delight. Maida turned first to Richard, but he colored distressfully, and begged that Flora might tell his story for him. He should only spoil the game. Flora, with a little tinge of graceful reluctance, obeyed. No woman had been to the summit of Mont Blanc, she said, till one young girl, named Marie, resolved to have this glory. The guides told her it was madness, but she persevered. She took the staff and everything requisite, and, following a party, began the ascent. She bravely supported every fatigue, climbed each precipice, was undaunted by the giddy heights she attained, bravely crossed the fields of snow, supported the bitter cold, and finally, though suffering severely, arrived at the topmost peak, looked forth where woman had never looked before, felt her heart swell at the attainment of her utmost ambition, and the name of Marie was inscribed as that of the woman who alone has had the glory of standing on the summit of the giant of the Alps. It was prettily enunciated, and had a pleasing effect. Maida stood conning the words, woman, giant, mountain, glory, and begged for another tale. Mine shall not be so stupid as Flora's, said Harry. We have an old sailor on board the Alcestis. A giant he might be for his voice, but he sailed once in the Glory of the West, and there they had a monkey that was picked up in Africa, and one day this old fellow found his queer messmate, as he called him, spying through glass just like the captain. The captain had a glorious collection of old coins, and the like, dug up in some of the old Greek colonies, and whenever Master Monkey saw him overhauling them, he would get out a brass button or a card or two, and turn 'em over, and chatter at them, and glory over them, quite knowing, said Harry, imitating the gesture, and I dare say he saw Vivi and Tiberius Caesar as well as the best of them." "Thank you, Mr. Harry," said Maida. "I think we are at no loss for monkeys here, but I have not the word yet. Who comes next? Ethel?" "I shall blunder, I forewarn you," said Ethel, "but this is mine. There was a young king who had an old tutor, whom he despised because he was so strict, so he got rid of him and took to idle sport. One day, when he was out hunting in a forest, a white hind came and ran before him till she guided him to a castle, and there he found a lady all dressed in white, with a beamy crown on head, and so nobly beautiful that he fell in love with her at once, and was only sorry to see another prince who was come to her palace too. She told him her name was Gloria, and that she had many suitors, but the choice did not depend on herself. She could only be won by him who deserved her, and for 3 years they were to be on their probation, trying for her. So she dismissed them, only burning to gain her, and telling them to come back in 3 years' time. But they had not gone far before they saw another palace, much finer, all glittering with gold and silver, and their Lady Gloria came out to meet them, not in her white dress, but in one all gay and bright with fine colors, and her crown they now saw was of diamonds. She told them they had only seen her everyday dress and house, this was her best, and she showed them about the castle and all the pictures of her former lovers. There was Alexander, who had been nearer retaining her than anyone, only the fever prevented it. There was Pyrrhus, always seeking her, but slain by a tile, Julius Caesar, Tamerlane, all the rest, and she hoped that one of these two would really prove worthy and gain her by going in the same path as these great people. So our prince went home, his head full of being like Alexander and all the rest of them, and he sent for his good old tutor to reckon up his armies and see whom he could conquer in order to win her. But the old tutor told him he was under a mistake. The second lady he had seen was a treacherous cousin of Gloria, who drew away her suitors by her deceits, and whose real name was Vana Gloria. If he wished to earn the true Gloria, he must set to work to do his subjects good and to be virtuous. And he did. He taught them, and he did justice to them, and he bore it patiently and kindly when they did not understand. But by and by the other king, who had no good tutor to help him, had got his armies together and conquered ever so many people and drawn off their men to be soldiers, and now he attacked the good prince, and was so strong that he gained the victory, though both prince and subjects fought manfully with heart and hand. But the battle was lost, and the faithful prince wounded and made prisoner, but bearing it most patiently, till he was dragged behind the other's triumphal car with all the rest, when the 3 years were up, to be presented to Vana Gloria. And so he was carried into the forest, bleeding and wounded, and his enemy drove the car over his body, and stretched out his arms to Vana Gloria, and found her a vain, ugly wretch, who grew frightful as soon as he grasped her. But the good dying prince saw the beautiful beamy face of his lady love bending over him. "Oh," he said, "vision of my life, hast thou come to lighten my dying eyes? Never, never, even in my best days, did I deem that I could be worthy of thee. The more I strove, the more I knew that Gloria is for none below, for me less than all." And then the lady came and lifted him up, and she said, "Gloria is given to all who do and suffer truly in a good cause, for faithfulness is glory, and that is thine." Ethel's language had become more flowing as she grew more eager in the tale, and they all listened with suspended interest. Norman asked where she got the story. "Out of an old French book, the Magasin des Enfants," was the answer. "But why did you alter the end?" said Flora. "Why kill the poor man? He used to be prosperous. Why not?" "Because I thought," said Ethel, "that Gloria could not properly belong to any one here, and if he was once conscious of it, it would be all spoiled." "Well, Maida, do you guess?" "Oh, the word! I had forgotten all about it. I think I know what it must be, but I should so like another story. May I not have one?" said Maida, coaxingly. "Mary, it is you." Mary fell back on her papa and begged him to take hers. Papa told the best stories of all, she said, and Maida looked beseeching. My story will not be as long as Ethel's, said the doctor, yielding with a half-reluctant smile. My story is of a hummingbird, a little creature that loved its master with all its strength and longed to do somewhat for him. It was not satisfied with its lot, because it seemed merely a vain and profitless creature. The nightingale sang praise, and the wood sounded with the glory of its strains. The fowl was valued for its flesh, the ostrich for its plume, but what could the little hummingbird do, save rejoice in the glory of the flood of sunbeams, and disport itself over the flowers, and glance in the sunny light, as its bright breastplate flashed from rich purple to dazzling flame color, and its wings supported it, fluttering so fast that the eye could hardly trace them, as it darted its slender beak into the deep bell blossoms. So the little bird grieved, and could not rest, for thinking that it was useless in this world, that it sought merely its own gratification, and could do nothing that could conduce to the glory of its master. But one night a voice spoke to the little bird. "Why hast thou been placed here," it said, "but at the will of thy master? Was it not that he might delight himself in thy radiant plumage, and see thy joy in the sunshine? His gifts are thy buoyant wing, thy beauteous colors, the love of all around, the sweetness of the honey drop in the flowers, the shade of the palm leaf. Esteem them, then, as his. Value thine own bliss, while it lasts, as the token of his care and love. And while thy heart praises him for them, and thy wings quiver and dance to the tune of that praise, then, indeed, thy gladness conduces to no vain glory of thine own, in beauty or in graceful flight, but thou art a creature serving, as best thou canst, to his glory." "I know the word," half-whispered Maida, not without a trembling of the lip. "I know why you told the story, Dr. May, but one is not as good as the hummingbirds." The elder ladies had begun to look at watches, and talk of time to go home, and Jem Jennings, having been seen rearing himself up from behind the barrow, the doctor proceeded to investigate his case, was perfectly satisfied of the boy's truth, and as ready as the young ones to befriend him. A letter should be written at once, desiring his father to look out for him on Friday, when he should go by the same train as Harry, who was delighted at the notion of protecting him so far, and begged to be allowed to drive him home to Stoneborough in the gig. Consent was given, and Richard being added to give weight and discretion, the gig set out at once. The doctor, much to Maida's delight, took his place in the break. Blanche, who, in the morning, had been inclined to despise it as something akin to a cart, now finding it a popular conveyance, was urgent to return in it, and Flora was made over to the carriage, not at all unwillingly, for, though it separated her from Maida, it made a senior of her. Norman's fate conveyed him to the exalted seat beside the driver of the brake, where he could only now and then catch the sounds of mirth from below. He had enjoyed the day exceedingly, with that sort of abandon more than ordinarily delicious to grave or saddened temperaments, when roused or drawn out for a time. Maida's winning grace and sweetness had a peculiar charm for him, and, perhaps, his having been originally introduced to her as ill, and in sorrow, had given her manner towards him a sort of kindness which was very gratifying. And now he felt as if he was going back to a very dusky, dusty world. The last and blithest day of his holidays was past, and he must return to the misapprehensions and injustice that had blighted his school career, be kept beneath boys with half his ability and without generous feeling, and find all his attainments useless in restoring his position. Dr. Hoxton's dull scholarship would chill all pleasure in his studies. There would be no companionship among the boys. Even his supporters, Earnscliffe and Larkins, were gone, and Harry would leave him still under a cloud. Norman felt it more as disgrace than he had done since the first, and wished he had consented to quit the school when it had been offered, be made a man instead of suffering these doubly irksome provocations, which rose before him in renewed force. And what would that little hummingbird think of me if she knew me disgraced? Thought he. But it is of no use to think of it. I must go through with it, and as I always am getting vainglorious, I had better have no opportunity. I did not declare I renounced vain pomp and glory last week, to begin coveting them now again." So Norman repressed the sigh as he looked at the school buildings, which never could give him the pleasures of memory they afforded to others. The brake had set out before the carriage, so that Maida had to come in and wait for her governess. Before the vehicle had disgorged half of its contents, Harry had rushed out to meet them. Come in, Norman! Only here. Margaret shall tell you herself. Hurrah!" "Is Mr. Earnscliff come?" crossed Ethel's mind, but Margaret was alone, flushed, and holding out her hands. "Norman, where is he? Dear Norman, here is good news. Papa, Dr. Hoxton has been here, and he knows all about it. And oh, Norman, he is very sorry for the injustice, and you are ducks again." Norman really trembled so much that he could neither speak nor stand, but sat down on the window seat, while a confusion of tongues asked more. Dr. Hoxton and Mr. Larkins had come to call. Heard no one was at home but Miss May, had, nevertheless, come in, and Margaret had heard that Mr. Larkins, who had before intended to remove his son from Stoneborough, had, in the course of the holidays, made discoveries from him which he could not feel justified in concealing from Dr. Hoxton. The whole of the transactions with Ball Hatchet, and Norman's part in them, had been explained, as well as the true history of the affray in Randall's Alley. How Norman had dispersed the boys, how they had again collected and, with the full concurrence of Harvey Anderson, renewed the mischief, how the Andersons had refused to bear witness in his favor, and how Ball Hatchet's ill will had kept back the evidence which would have cleared him. Little Larkins had told all, and his father had no scruple in repeating it and causing the investigation to be set on foot. Nay, he deemed that Norman's influence had saved his son, and came, as anxious to thank him as Dr. Hoxton, warm-hearted, though injudicious, was to repair his injustice. They were much surprised and struck by finding that Dr. May had been aware of the truth the whole time, and had patiently put up with the injustice and the loss of the scholarship, a loss which Dr. Hoxton would have given anything to repair, so as to have sent up a scholar likely to do him so much credit, but it was now too late, and he had only been able to tell Margaret how dismayed he was at finding out that the boy, to whom all the good order in his school was owing, had been so ill used. Kind Dr. May's first feeling really seemed to be pity and sympathy for his old friend, the headmaster, in the shock of such a discovery. Harry was vociferously telling his version of the story to Ethel and Mary. Tom stood transfixed in attention. Maida, forgotten and bewildered, was standing near Norman, whose color rapidly varied, and whose breath came short and quick as he listened. A quick half-interrogation passed Maida's lips, heard by no one else. "It is only that it is all right," he answered, scarcely audibly. "They have found out the truth." "What? Who? You?" said Maida, as she heard words that implied the past suspicion. "Yes," said Norman. "I was suspected, but never at home." "And is it over now?" "Yes, yes," he whispered huskily. "All is right, and Harry will not leave me in disgrace." Maida did not speak, but she held out her hand in hearty congratulation. Norman, scarcely knowing what he did, grasped and wrung it so tight that it was positive pain as he turned away his head to the window to struggle with those irrepressible tears. Maida's color flushed into her cheek as she found it still held, almost unconsciously, perhaps, in his agitation, and she heard Margaret's words, that both gentlemen had said Norman had acted nobly, and that every revelation made in the course of their examination had only more fully established his admirable conduct. "Oh, Norman, Norman, I am so glad!" cried Mary's voice in the first pause, and, Margaret asking where he was, he suddenly turned round, recollected himself, and found it was not the back of the chair that he had been squeezing, blushed intensely, but made no attempt at apology, for indeed he could not speak. He only leaned down over Margaret to receive her heartfelt embrace, and, as he stood up again, his father laid his hand on his shoulder. "My boy, I am glad." But the words were broken, and, as if neither could bear more, Norman hastily left the room, Ethel rushing after him. "Quite overcome," said the doctor, "and no wonder. He felt it cruelly, though he bore up gallantly. Well, July?" "I'll go down to school with him tomorrow, and see him ducks again. I'll have 3 times 3," shouted Harry. "Hip, hip, hooray!" and Tom and Mary joined in chorus. "What is all this?" exclaimed Flora, opening the door. "Is every one gone mad?" Many were the voices that answered. "Well, I am glad, and I hope the Andersons will make an apology. But where is poor Meta? Quite forgotten?" "Meta would not wonder if she knew all," said the doctor, turning, with a sweet smile that had in it something, nevertheless, of apology. "Oh, I am so glad, said Maida, her eyes full of tears, as she came forward. And there was no helping it. The first kiss between Margaret May and Margaret Rivers was given in that overflowing sympathy of congratulation. The doctor gave her his arm to take her to the carriage, and, on the way, his quick, warm words filled up the sketch of Norman's behavior. Meta's eyes responded better than her tongue, but, to her good-bye, she could not help adding, "Now I have seen true glory." His answer was much such a grip as her poor little fingers had already received, but though they felt hot and crushed all the way home, the sensation seemed to cause such throbs of joy that she would not have been without it. End of Part 1, Chapter 26. Recording by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona.